Okay, we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to Coast-to-Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge. There's a cat. Your fortnightly cat charge on EVs and infrastructure. Eric Way and Walter of the Network Architect channel, Eric of Muse Coulomb. How are you both doing?
I'm doing okay.
It's delightful here in Charlotte. There's been a lot of bad news about weather, but I haven't seen a lick of it.
Eric, Walter, you are in a very cozy spot, and it seems like you're just kind of mocking the rest of the country right now.
Well, hopefully everyone's warming inside.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll explain my background. It's I got back into a gas vehicle recently, and as the roads froze, I was in a Chevy Volt. It wasn't fully gas. I did manage to go. It goes about 27 miles on electric now, so we got a little bit of gas anxiety kick in. But yes, we are Coast-to-Coast EVs. We're on number 6 now, I believe. And if you are more of a audio bent, you can catch us on Spotify and a few other places. We got up on Acast over the last week, and there's a bunch of episodes up there now, the last 5 from just before the new year, and then our first one of 2024. So you can go and check that out. Give us a review if you've listened a little bit and like the stream. And let's see, leave name, not names, you don't have to do your name, but you can do what EV you drive, where you are in the country, because that's going to be pretty relevant to today's topics. We're just going to kick off with the big freeze. It's getting cold, and some of our favorite forms of transport are having some problems. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's the gas pumps in Calgary freezing up. Really cold up there. It's a really tough time for race drivers. Having problems.
How are you
the sarcasm? The sarcasm.
There's so many places, but it happens in Illinois as well. Here's Urbana, Illinois, not so long ago.
My horse trough doesn't freeze up in winter.
I know. I think we should all go back. That's the only form of reliable transportation. All right, so no, that isn't the case. Obviously, we're talking about Chicago and some of the issues that folks have had up there. So we've changed our running around a little bit because we have some guests who are actually from that area, Lafayette, Indiana, and Chicago. So I'm just going to bring everybody up right now. So we have Candice Jurek, who is over in Indiana. Hello, Candice. Welcome.
Hi.
Darren Orange, returning guest from the Chicagoland area, which is kind of the place to be for all this frozen EV action right now. So welcome, everybody. And let's start with Candice. Could you give us a little bit about your kind of location, what you drive and what you're seeing at the moment?
Sure, yeah. So I just have to say this because people in this community would hate me if I didn't. I'm actually in West Lafayette. So
okay, gotcha. My apologies.
On the other side of the river, that's like a big deal here. So I had to
my Midwestern geography been so cruelly exposed.
Right. Here in the home of Purdue, people make the distinction, so I had to do that. Okay. But yeah, I drive a 2016 BMW i3 Rex. And it's not jailbroken yet. I want to, but I am scared to do it because I don't want to mess with my warranty and stuff. But I use the only fast charging station between Indianapolis and Chicago. That's a non-Tesla charger. And it is Electrify America. And the stations are always broken there, which is the reason why I'm here, because I like to talk about charging infrastructure in rural
images whilst you speak. So we've got your trusty i3 Rex there. This is at the West Lafayette station, if I'm correct, right?
No, that's Lafayette.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I live in West Lafayette.
At the end of this stream, I will have this down, I promise. Okay, so you're out there, you're testing these stations in the BMW i3 Rex, which is awesome, and we'll speak to that a little bit more as we go along. Darren is, remind me exactly where you are in the Chicagoland area, Darren?
Right by O'Hare Airport, just about 10 minutes away. So it's probably the easiest way for people to know.
And you've been out there. Obviously, it's only just kind of broken in the last day or two, from what we can tell. But there's a lot of media kind of attention on the charges in your area. What can you give us as a kind of just quick summary of what you've been up to?
So I drove around today to go take a look and see what's going after the past 2 days. There was some service being done at the O'Hare version 2 Supercharger today, but people were charging. I successfully charged there today. I went to another urban charger at the Rosemont Mall and was able to charge there, no issue. And all of them were working. It was actually full and people were sleeping in their cars. I know we were joking about earlier. That was definitely happening. And then also there's an EA station in that same mall, actually, and it was effectively full. I don't think there was anyone waiting. I think maybe one person was waiting, maybe if that, but it was full and seemed like it was working fine. So.
Okay. So, and just for a little context, in case anybody hasn't, looked at the headlines recently, so the Chicago area has been, it's certainly below freezing, but not quite as low as those Calgary temperatures we were putting out there, like -30. But the initial kind of wave that I got of it, at least, and Eric and Walter, you can speak to what you've seen in a sec here. The Tesla Superchargers were the biggest one. That's what gets the most media attention. So those were what the mainstream media led with. But it sounds like it's across the board. Any chargers, it's a mix of being in a very built-up area, having a lot of EV adoption in those areas. People maybe not being familiar with their battery conditioning features, needing to get that pack warmed up. And just a lot of that feeding into a city that frankly already has, the challenges that Darren kind of hinted at there with sleeping rideshare drivers, folks who are charging to 100% because they're on their weekly grocery shop, that kind of thing. So that's what's been happening the last 36, 48 hours. Eric, what have you been seeing? What's your initial kind of hot take?
Well, I was going to say, so Steve, are you saying it's a hotbed of freezing batteries? No. Sorry. Why am I here? No. It kind of. I don't want to be even. I don't want to be validated anymore. But it's the same thing that I've been chanting since early on with EVs. Is in metro areas, you are always going to have congestion at chargers. And I know people say, well, it means that if you can't charge at home, but it's not necessarily the people who can't charge at home. It's the rideshare drivers who are occupying most of those chargers, because it's just so much cheaper to drive an EV than it is to drive a gas car. And if you can use a charger, you're going to use that charger and you're just going to park there like you're a taxi waiting for a fare. And so that's going to cause a backlog in and of itself. But, the other thing that kind of strikes me about it is we've kind of become numb to Electrify America not really working well, right? So Candace, that station that you were showing that you rely on, at least the one that was in the picture in Lafayette, that one is the old original Signet units. And we've gotten kind of accustomed to those failing often, right? Those original Signet EA stations are just not very reliable. I think the thing with Tesla is that in Chicago, it made news because the expectation is the superchargers always work, right? And so if you have a single failure now, that gets blasted like a megaphone anywhere and everywhere. So if you have a single failure, you set those expectations so high that a single failure is going to be nationwide newsworthy. Even if it's conditions that just don't really, like, there's outside of your control. Even if it's not a failing of the hardware itself, it could be the grid, it could be the network, it could be any number of other factors, but it's kind of set up to the point that any minor failure and it's a big deal. And I think that's what we saw as it got blown out of proportion.
Walter, how are you? What have you seen, and how are you thinking about the kind of initial reaction?
My company is headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, and a majority of my crew is there, and they have the unfortunate circumstance of not having road clearing infrastructure. So they've been held up by this storm pretty significantly over the past several days. So I've been watching this storm coming on for a week, from the distance and corresponding to people over there. It was definitely one of those Arctic blasts, and I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago, so I'm familiar with what it's like when a polar vortex comes down and freezes everything up, and having to get jump starts on your car battery and things like that. So I'm familiar with the biting cold that sinks in. But my perspective, at least from a distance, is this is the new normal. We have now reached a point in EV adoption where it has surpassed the infrastructure's ability to sustain the bread and milk run on the grocery store during times where panic sets in and people go to top off their cars all at the same time. Everyone gets the same thought. There's not enough infrastructure in order to accommodate them. So they start to queue up and then their batteries die. And then it hits the news because people are in frigid temperatures with cold EVs. And so my opinion is that we're stuck in a juggernaut of EV adoption exceeding the ability of the infrastructure to keep pace. And I don't see a way out of this anytime soon. Again, I read an article today on Clean Technica about the $1.3 million goal by 2030 and having to exceed 400 installs per day in order to achieve that. So, I mean, this is what success looks like. This is an EV revolution in motion right now.
Growing pains.
Growing pains, yes, sir.
Cool. Well, so let's go around the comments here a little bit, find out where people are. Obviously, we've got the country covered pretty well today. Big Barney and Buffalo, snow. That's pretty typical for you. That lake effect is brutal. That's Chicago and Buffalo getting that same thing. Brian Ruby is happy to even be mocked by Walter. Brian is going to be a valuable resource in the comments there today because he's charging over in the plains areas, Minnesota, over into Dakotas. So Superchargers in the cold is Brian's game. So you can see years of the Chargers just working fine for him despite the troubles in Chicago. Hello from Tampa, Florida. That is not going to fill anyone with envy at all, right? We're all happy to be in our sub-zero places. Jay Donaldson, good evening. Also in Ohio, getting that cold. Brian has 8 degrees in southern Minnesota, so you'll have to go a bit north to make it any worse. Mike Mahan is in Southern California. You get the highest so far, 59 degrees. I don't even get out of bed for that. That's not what else we got. Let's see. And Stefan just DV'd through the cold in Calgary. No problems. All right, there we go. Calgary. So, those fuel pumps, you can drive by them and laugh. But again, this is a good point, actually. The charging here, we're talking about fast charging, obviously, right? If you have home charging, and whether it's in a garage or outside, this is not an issue, right? This is, Darren, you can speak to this a little bit, having lived through the kind of Chicago winters and having home charging there. If you're using the EV in its best case scenario, charging at home, either in a warm garage or just even outside in the driveway, there you're getting the benefit of it being constantly plugged in, being able to precondition, and for the most part keep it up to a state of charge that you can then go and charge, fast charge on the road. Is that kind of your lifestyle, what you've seen in the cold winters?
So we have a detached garage, so it does eventually reach the ambient outside temperature, but we do keep the car plugged in obviously all the time, and charging at home, it basically trivializes all these issues and conflicts. You don't have the problem if we precondition the car, we even go to the car. So the car is usually warm and toasty by the time we even go out to it. So it's not something that we think about or we experience too much at all. If you have home charging, it's kind of like, these are like, I would care if I was traveling, but I think to everyone else's point, like this is a lot of like local individuals who aren't traveling. And in reality, if I was traveling, when I looked at all my different directions, there's no issue. I could go wherever right now and it would be no problem. But the denser areas, fast charging like this, where you're like in the middle of a downtown, it's a bigger problem, I would argue. But at home, it's just, we don't even think about it. It's a non-issue for sure.
And Candice, you're not, do you have home charging, or are you purely reliant on the public network?
I'm completely reliant on the public network. I live in a rural apartment complex with no chargers. And I have surveyed the entire Tippecanoe County area, and there are only 3 apartment communities in the whole county that have chargers. And, I mean, I think that is probably the next kind of point of discussion in charging as the EV, revolution continues to evolve, is that what are people doing that live in rural areas that aren't homeowners? And that's kind of where I entered this discussion, because I've always lived in, very suburban areas and cities. So I never even had to think about rural charging infrastructure in Maryland. I mean, it wasn't an issue. But here, it's a huge issue. And most of the chargers in Tippecanoe County are on the campus of Purdue. And the ones that are not are not monitored enough. They are not in terms of maintenance and upkeep. There was a charger that was down across the street from the library in front of City Hall for a month, and it was a charge point charger. So that's really why I started to talk about, infrastructure and advocacy, because for me, I'm looking at my charging options every day about how convenient is it for me to charge. And now I just found out through the wonderful education that I'm getting from you guys that I even needed to warm up the battery to charge ahead of time. I didn't even know that. Because I never even thought about cold weather charging before. So
also, we have representatives from kind of each era of EV adoption here, I guess. Eric, you probably go back, well, you and Darren probably about the furthest, but in the Bolt EV, when you hit those Northern California kind of winter temperatures, were there any surprises there? What kind of, obviously you were on the first wave there, so you're just figuring out the car, but from my recollection, there wasn't a lot of information out there about cold weather performance, how it was going to charge in the cold, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's almost like if you keep moving, it's much less of an issue. And in California in particular, the weather just isn't that cold, right? Like we get down into the 30s pretty regularly, sometimes down into the 20s. But just like what Darren was talking about, for me, even though my car is outside sitting in ambient temperature, it's plugged in. So when it's 20 degrees and you're plugged in, it still doesn't mean, that much of, it doesn't make that much of a difference. And then once you hit the road, if you're doing freeway speeds the entire time, you're going to be pretty insulated. I think Bjorn Nyland out in Norway, he would do these stress tests with EVs, and even the Nissan Leaf, no battery heating whatsoever, and freezing temperatures 200, 300 miles into his trip, and the battery was overheating, and it's sub-freezing temperatures. And so, there's still the possibility of just using your momentum to keep going. So I've been pretty well insulated from that. I've taken trips to colder areas, but those areas usually had slower chargers anyway. The Bolt EV is already a slower charger. So if you saw slow charging, it was 40 kilowatts. And it's like, what does that mean? It's
not so much of a...
Yeah, if you're seeing 40 kilowatts in a 100 kilowatt hour Mercedes, you're going to be upset. So...
So in our Tesla kind of reps, or people who have done the Tesla trips, Darren and Walter. Walter, you've taken a few rental Tesla trips in the more recent kind of months. Did any of those hit lower temperatures, or because you're so far down there, you're still in pretty healthy places?
Yeah, no, I haven't really hit that Arctic cold since I took a trip to Montreal probably about 10 years ago. And obviously I grew up in the Chicagoland area, and you get cold there. But since I've moved to the southeast, it's very temperate here. There's occasional cold blast, but nothing like what I experienced growing up and what is occurring now in the mid-central United States, which is pretty brutal. I understand it's lessening to some extent, but nothing like that around here.
And then, so, I mean, we should move on to Darren's been out and about gathering some data. Darren, before we move off the kind of what the EV should tell you and, you know, how much the user should know versus how much the EV should be kind of informing the driver, what do you see as you hit the cold weather? What's the Tesla telling you? How much of the kind of stuff we've seen from the Chicagoland Tesla issues could have been avoided if they were listening to the car or just kind of monitoring the tools they have available?
So there's a lot there to kind of unpack, but more or less the biggest problem is time to precondition. I think that what I've noticed, and from my testing I did today, just to see what if someone was naive to the fact of navigating to a supercharger, which for those that don't know, if you navigate a Tesla to a supercharger, it will start to precondition the battery. I wanted to see what would happen. You just didn't do that at all. It doesn't produce good results when it's 0 degrees, obviously. For everything is true for all EVs. If it doesn't precondition, it's going to probably be bad, especially if you go from 0 degrees and then try to charge it 15 minutes later to fast charge it. It's not going to be happy. I then tried to give a short run where I did with preconditioning for another like 10 or 15 minutes, like to another supercharger, to see what's the benefits, implications of just even doing like the smarter choice. And it netted maybe a doubling of charge speed, going from 14 kilowatts to like 26.
Let me bring up your data here. This may be too crunched. I don't know if you can see it. I've got a cropped version if not.
Yeah, so this is more or less my test I did today. No preconditioning, driving to a version 2, seeing what would happen, and then going from a version 2 to an urban supercharger. In this situation, I don't think it makes any difference. It's for the test purposes. But for those that don't know, this is Teslafy, and you can see a lot of data. So in the first superchargings, you can actually see the max I pulled was 15 kilowatts. And the second one was, I think it was 26, was right there. Maybe more impressively, and what I didn't expect is how little energy the car actually expended initially. Like it used very little power, even though it was frozen as a brick. So, and I think that was skewed because us having sun, which might be a very underrated feature, is sunlight when it comes to cold weather driving in a car, especially a Tesla. Because with it being mostly glass, it does produce a greenhouse effect very quickly if you have direct sunlight. So if your car is sitting in 10 degrees or 0 degrees in the shade and you go into the sun with that car, the car is naturally going to go easily into the 50s. So just a side note. But as far as like the chargers go, there was service going on to the V2 supercharger. People were there charging. I want to say if anything was down, it was like 2 or 3 out of the 12 that were there. And outside that, people were using it. I was able to plug in. There was no problem. There didn't seem like there was any major crowding or lines or anything like that either, which is shocking, honestly. Now, Darren, yeah.
Was that V2 the one that was featured in the news story?
No, I do want to talk about that. I can switch over to that. So the funny part of the story is that the actual supercharger that was featured, I've been to multiple times. It's a V3 supercharger in Oak Brook, in one of the most congested areas in kind of the suburban community, if you want to call it that. Oak Brook's kind of just outside of Chicago, but close to a lot of things. And it happened to be only an 8-stall installation V3. And it is hammered by people. It is always near full, if not always has a wait, regardless of the circumstances. Now, coincidentally, if you drive 3 or 4 miles away, you get an Electrify America charger. You go another mile or two, you get another 16 installation V3 supercharger, just 10 minutes away. But everyone chose to go to this supercharger. It had a problem, and I guess no one knew what to do with that information. Like the other one never went down, as far as I could tell. It was just 5 miles away. And did people show up with cold batteries? Did batteries start freezing and then they tried to plug them in, nothing charged? These are all questions I don't have exact answers to. But an 8-stall that's usually has a 5 to 10 minute wait, I feel like there's a lot of things going on there that's just compounding a problem. I think that's the whole story, is that supercharger, just one supercharger in Oak Brook, an 8-stall. Across the street from this 8-stall is a wonderful Volta installation with some 16 level 2s and even a level 3 DC fast charger. So I don't know. People should never have been, I guess that's right, stranded. There was a lot of charging options in the area. They should have been able to plug in or do what they need to do to get to another fast charger nearby. It wasn't like there wasn't options ever. So this one little tiny 8-stall that's abused heavily gets all the notoriety, which is, of course, what the news does, I think.
So I don't know
So
if anyone has any kind of deja vu here, but this time last year there was a pretty big, hullabaloo over the Electrify America, the new stations that were being upgraded. One didn't work in the cold for one session, and that was the kind of end of the world for a lot of people. And I remember saying at the time the same thing, Darren. It's like, yes, I get that, in that condition, in that particular circumstance, there's going to be a problem, and that's not great. But, there were chargers that were working nearby. There were Tesla chargers that were working. There were level 2s that were available. And, to Stefan's point here, who's up in Calgary, if the weather's minus 40, should we really be traveling? It doesn't matter. If the fuel pumps are freezing, everyone's saying the grid breaking down. There are kind of, you get some signs here that maybe you shouldn't be traveling. If it looks like this, maybe with a Rivian you can do it, but get some perspective there. But Walter, I don't know, you go certainly onto the channels, you see the kind of feeling that people have, even if you're not living the cold. You're seeing the reaction to these kind of, that this doesn't work in the cold, this isn't happening. Do you feel that same thing, like it's being kind of blown up by one kind of anecdote or one particular scenario?
Yeah, I can't decide if what we're looking at is similar to the weatherman bracing against the wind while the person is walking the dog behind them, sensationalization that news outlets are famous for, or if what we're looking at is just more people hitting DC fast chargers where they're all with herd mentality coming to top off prior to a weather event. And as a result, there is shakeout because people are waiting with low batteries that end up hitting zero, and news truck pulls up at the right time, and Bob's your uncle. I can't decide which one we're looking at, or if it's sincere systemic flaws in electric vehicles. I suspect it's not, because friend of the channel, Ryan Reeby, has not been talking about stranded Teslas in Minnesota. And I know for a fact, because I've been there, it's colder than Chicago in Minnesota, and by not a small margin either. But we don't hear anything. So what it looks like is the congestion is the root cause of what we're looking at. I don't have anything besides just suspicion, but that seems to be what we're looking at.
Yeah, there's speaking to the kind of the newer versus the older, people who've seen been there, done it. Candice, we talked a little bit. You're more in using ChargeWay, I think, as an app, and spoiler alert, have Brandon on from ChargeWay on the next one, so there's some synchronicity there. But Plug4 is my go-to, and everybody has their own way of doing this. But there's a certain amount of preparing before you hit the road, or kind of knowing the vehicle. How does this factor into not just what you see as a new EV driver, but how you feel about putting over to other people what EV driving is going to be like? If you're trying to recommend an electric vehicle in your area, are you having to say, well, in the winter though, maybe a bit dicey, you need to have home charging? And what's your kind of perspective on the new EV driver?
Recommend what? Recommendation? I'm recommending ice. No, you know what? I think that, this is a really good question, right? Because for me, living in this area, being a new EV driver, I think that there's a huge gap between driver education and utilities. I think it's a combination of people not knowing how their car really operates, right? And I think that the dealerships really need to do a better job and have a responsibility to the consumer to teach them about the car, right? And I don't think that that's happening. And the really funny thing at the Lafayette station is that it's right down the street from Hertz and Enterprise. And I don't know what they are thinking, but apparently they have like a whole fleet of EV vehicles at these two locations. And I learn a lot about cars and new technologies, because I meet people that don't know what they're doing at those chargers, and they are not EV owners, and they rent these cars and pull up to the station and don't know what to do, and they knock on my window. And that is really kind of just insane, right? And yesterday I met a guy, brand new, beautiful Beamer, one of the newer sedans. I wish I paid more attention, but it was just like so cold. I was just trying to get the heck out of there. But he pulled up, one of the plugs was not working, but the station was working. But for some reason, it was just like he could not get the car to connect to the charger. And he left and came back. And I felt so bad because there were only 4 stations at this location anyway. And by the time he came back, after I guess he went to search for other chargers, all of the plugs were full, right? And so there was nothing that he could do besides wait. But he didn't have any education from Enterprise on how to operate the car. And I think that that's a really big deal. And like for me, myself, like I was saying, I didn't realize you have to heat up your battery to like get a better charge. I was on the charger for 2 hours in 9-degree weather, and I didn't know why my car wasn't charging. And these are the types of things where I think, car clubs, EV clubs, things like that are really going to be the catalyst, along with apps like ChargeWay, to kind of propel the consumer experience forward.
For sure.
I do want to add to that to compliment there, Candace, because our area, I did ask some AI stuff earlier today about the number of Hertz Teslas and or EVs that are being rented out right now to Uber and Lyft drivers for rideshare. And in the AI technology, approximately 800 to 1,000 in Chicagoland. So, and if they're not being trained on how to use these vehicles and they're out there driving in, 0 or sub-0 degree temperature, you can see how very quickly, and they show up to these chargers, the ones that are most used, like I mentioned, are often there because of rideshare. And as a result, so it sums up why we have a problem in the larger city areas with that. So 1,000. Granted, not every city has that going on. Apparently, it's only certain locations, but it's here in Illinois and Chicago, and we've got some 1,000 of these uneducated. No offense, they are, but Hertz and other companies are not doing it. They're not educating them. I think there's been tons of videos about that now too, about drivers renting EVs, having experience and knowing nothing, and literally the rental company tells them nothing. Here's a key or whatever. Good luck. More or less.
Well, Walter has rented very recently. I mean, obviously, Walter, you know exactly what you're doing, and this is, an old kind of hat for you. But have you ever tried the secret shopper thing, or have you done something where you're, at least trying to get the idea of whether they know what they're talking about, or are they literally handing you the card and off you go?
The last time I went to go pick up my Tesla Model 3 for a long distance trip, there was a person there asking for a manager special, and the only thing left was a Tesla. And they were reluctant. They've never been in an EV. They knew nothing about it. I did hear the branch manager, I think is who was conversing with this customer, say, I'll explain to you everything, how it works, and he was going to take him back and show him how to charge it and how the infotainment worked and how to navigate. So in that case, that was a pretty good store though. And I could see in larger locations where it's just a turnstile where you show up and you get your card and off you go, there would be no form of education. And I think there's like YouTube videos, but who's going to stop and look at a YouTube video while you're cruising along out of the airport? No one's going to do that. So it's definitely got some work to do on the education side, I would agree.
And I was going to say, because I think, Darren, you also rented recently, right? An EV. But they seem to have maintained their refueling policy, right?
Yeah.
From gas cars, where
80%.
you have to fill it back up to a certain percentage. And I'm wondering if also compounding. So Candace, those issues you're seeing where nearby Hertz is renting out all these EVs, are people trying to charge up to 80 or 90 or 100% so that they can return it to Hertz without a fee? Like that's a problem if that's happening too.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I don't know about people returning. So usually I am meeting people when they were coming to the charger when they just picked the car up. And it's really crazy. I was actually really happy to see you, Darren, when you said you used to drive a Bolt, because that's why I was like, oh, did you have any of those issues? So I, not too long ago, met this kid, and he was a kid. He probably was 20, and the charger, he was driving a Bolt, and the charger would not connect to the station. And he was, I felt so bad because he was there for hours, and kind of like sometimes how you just feel bad for people and you like do your business and like go about your way, and you just get this feeling like I should just go check to see if this kid is okay. And so I pull back around and I'm like, hey bud, what's going on? And he's like, the charger won't connect and he doesn't know what to do and like yada yada. And I said, you just got a rental, huh? You've been here for about 2.5 hours. And he said, yeah. And so I said, okay, well, let's try to figure it out together. And that was exactly what I did. I went online and I didn't go to Google. I went to, Bing, the new co-pilot for Microsoft. And I just asked, like, are there any like manufacturing issues with the Bolt? And that was kind of one of the first things that came up. And I said, hey kid, you know what? You might want to call the rental place, call your parents, and, let them know that this is a manufacturer issue and you probably are going to need another car. It was getting late. It was pretty cold. And that was the only way that he like figured out that this is probably not going to happen for you tonight. So I think it really has a lot to do with driver education, and the same thing in Chicago. I mean, I saw on Instagram, I know it's not like an official news channel, but I saw on Instagram this girl made a post and there were like 10 Teslas at the Tesla chargers, and I couldn't help but to think, and I know people aren't going to like this, what I'm going to say, just because I'm a bad car mommy. So like, when a lot of women are driving cars, we are very oblivious to the real owner's manual and operation of the car. And so I think there's like a lot of tough education, kind of like hard knock education that happens. And it really felt like that was kind of, at least from the, the little post that I saw on Instagram, one of the issues that the battery wasn't, heated up. And they got there thinking they were going to have a quick charge, and there was a line, and their car died, So I think that's a huge issue.
I think this is it's everybody though. I think and it's you can read the manual, but I will attest to the fact that my Hyundai manual is written in very broken terms and doesn't exactly give you. I was explaining someone to on the channel today the preconditioning feature, which is added after the fact, and it's just entirely in line with the manual. It doesn't tell you what you need to know. You're figuring it out, on the go, either yourself or watching YouTube videos to kind of get this stuff out. I'll testify to that by I watched a lot of Eric's videos to figure out what the hell the Bolt was going to do, and started my channel when I realized maybe Eric wasn't getting into as cold places as I was, and why was it doing 20 kilowatts instead of 50 kilowatts, and so you have that education. But the difference being, I was learning at a time when, as Darren kind of pointed out, there were very few EVs on the road. We had less than 10 models. The Electrify America with 4 stalls were like manna from heaven. Didn't matter if one of them wasn't working, because you only needed one, and that was a big upgrade on an EVgo 50 kilowatt that was in the back of a retail outlet. So that everybody's gone through that education, but just because we've been through it doesn't mean that the next wave of people who are getting into these vehicles don't need that same kind of help.
Steve, can I just say that I'm very offended that Bing doesn't watch my videos. So Candace, more than likely that Bolt EV owner just needed to lift up their handle and it would have activated the charger. I actually did. I've done several videos on it, and and apparently it's still not widely known. But Steve, to your point, I'm still seeing now technicians and engineers who will chime in groups and be answering questions directly to EV drivers that, to your point, should be in a manual, right? Or, we're even seeing it with Electrify America, where I had something completely wrong. Like, I know that there are certain stations with issues, but the issues are very distinct based on, is it a Signet station? Is it a BTC power station? Is it an ABB station? And what's happening with one of them might not be the same. Symptom might look the same, but it might not be the same issue from station to station. And that information just isn't widely enough distributed at this point.
Walter, as a first year debut edition Lyric owner, does that resonate with your experience of having to learn the car rather than being told how it works by the dealer?
The big transition was not really the Lyric. The big transition was leaving the Tesla ecosystem, because we were first adopted into EVs with Teslas, and the ubiquity of the supercharger network, the reliability, the additional stalls that they commonly put in just make for a very seamless transition from internal combustion. My personal opinion is, if you're a new EV driver, Tesla should be a first choice. The big transition happened when we switched to a CCS car. By the time we got the Lyric, it was our second CCS car, and by that time I had already got a really nasty case of the EV bug. And so I was fine. I could take it anywhere. Every time my wife allows me to take it, I'm fine. I'll take it wherever you want.
You very much do. We can see from the channel that your early trips were mostly about the fact that there was no charging there, not the fact that there was ample charging, right? You were trying to find actively DC fast charging deserts to explore. Yeah,
looking for the hard places to get to. And definitely, I'm fortunate enough to be close to cold country. And if you want a challenge, try to take an EV trip into cold country. It is rough, a rough road to hoe.
West Virginia, Mountain Mama.
Been there.
I'm going to crank through the comments quickly to make sure we don't miss anything. Marlin says, we'll finish up the Chicago thing here because we do want to move on to the sites and how they're designed. But he says, for me, the most eye-opening thing from the Chicago incident was that DC fast charging doesn't seem to use current to keep themselves at operating temperatures. If true, a major miss. And I'm reading out the comments in full because we're kind of going audio now with or audio only with stuff like Spotify. So I'm trying to be a bit more conscious of making sure we read out the comments there. So Eric, what do you think about that side? Is on the hardware side, what are you thinking that we should be working with these?
It really doesn't appear, to me at least, it really doesn't appear to be the hardware that was a failure, or at least it's not due to the cold, right? Yes, it's true that EV batteries are affected by cold. That's a chemical thing, though. When it comes to electronics, most electronics work fine. They work better, more efficiently the colder it gets. So I really don't think that it's necessarily the heat issue. I mean, I don't know, maybe Darren, if you could do some sleuthing around or whatever, but my guess is it's probably more to do with the utility or some sort of a power drop connection or something of that case. I don't think the cold temperatures, even remember you were referencing earlier, Kyle, I think it was Kyle Connor who ran into that problem initially with the really cold EA chargers that wouldn't function. That seemed to be a software setting. It's like, oh, it's this temperature, don't work now. And that's like that's not a hardware issue. That's not a functional issue. So I'm not really concerned too much about temperature and the charging hardware. That doesn't seem to be the primary concern.
I have noticed one thing with that, Eric, that the 150 chargers for EA in general seem to be significantly more reliable. I will mention that versus the 350s. I don't know why that would be entirely, but it does seem like from everything around my area, the 150s are all stayed up, basically, had no issues as far as what I could tell. I don't know what there is anything to that, but
maybe lower usage.
Well, the one by me they're all 150s, no 350s, and none of them went down. The one with the urban superchargers had no issues. So
the 350s have a lot of problems with the bolts that plug into them never get 350. They're always
Yeah, they never get 350.
So, I mean, every bolt that plugs into them, they're derated. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's
So interesting.
you should probably explain that joke, Steve.
Sorry, the bolt maxes out at 55 kilowatts. No matter what, you could plug it into one of the lovely new 400 kilowatts. It's never going to go above 55. Cranking back through the comments, I'm sorry. Platform Fanatic says, I ran into several EV drivers at an Electrify America station this weekend who had no idea what preconditioning is. They just assumed it was the charger's fault. They were getting slow speeds. Yeah, that's pretty common. We hit this. Everyone sends a reminder around on X and various other places. As the temperatures start to drop, everyone start paying attention to the plug share check-ins. It's about to get messy because everyone's going to complain about derated stations when their battery is cold. Jed says, Hertz told me to take my rental Polestar to a Tesla Supercharger to charge it before bringing it back. Well, in a couple of months' time, that might be valid, but at the time you were renting, no. Brian saw that as well when he had a Magic Dock party. A Tesla Magic Dock who Polestar showed up, thankfully, and it worked out just fine, but they did pull in the wrong way, and you have the whole dance to make that happen. I don't know if we're even going to talk about it tonight, but I'm worried that this kind of thing is going to be a lot more common as every EV starts descending upon Tesla superchargers. Brian says Teslas do have tutorials in the car's screen, but you have to know that and know how to find them.
Is there a tutorial to help you find the tutorial?
Yeah, that's very
You know how to get to the theater, and then you might find the tutorial. But you have to go to the theater for those who don't know. So
Darren's providing practical advice instead of puns, so please listen to him. Ignore Eric and I. Matt's Tech Review says, I think it's a huge lack of information, especially for people who are transitioning from gas to electric. When I bought my Bolt EV, the dealership had no idea how it even works. Candice is nodding as though that's a very common. I can see
Super
that.
common.
To crank through these quickly, rental companies absolutely have to have their own charging so you can bring an EV back empty. It would make renting so much easier. Yeah, and also if they have fast chargers on site, they have the added benefit of being able to go and show you how to use them. This can be a 2-minute, 3-minute demonstration, but all you need to do is go in there and say, this is what the plug looks like, whatever it is, whenever they hit a plug of NACS, CCS, even unlikely to be CHAdeMO in a rental, but to be able to show this is what it looks like, this is how you activate, this are the things that you're going to expect as you start to charge. It doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be complicated, it just has to be present.
Yeah, my experience is that the rental agencies, those cars don't sit stationary enough in order to get a charge because they're in and out. They get checked in, they get cleaned, and they're off to the next renter. And that's probably why Candice is seeing renters showing up at EA stations with 3/4 or half batteries trying to get topped off because they didn't have enough time to replenish.
Yeah, I'm going to start a whole new business where people tip me to learn how to charge their cars. So yes, absolutely.
Hand them your rate sheet as they tap on your window at the charger.
Yeah, I might as well.
Marlin says, I used to do tech support for kilovolt LFP ESS, so lithium iron phosphate energy storage system, I'm thinking. Those batteries, if they're under charging temps, would use current to heat up the operational temps and then only charge. Why don't EVs do this? Eric, I'm going to jump to you because you're my go-to.
And I might have to use Darren as backup a little bit too, because he also has a lot of practical experience. But I mean, even behind me, my cat is playing with the bus bar for an LFP battery. LFP is more temperature sensitive than the nickel batteries that are used in EVs to begin with. But even then, it's still it's a misunderstanding again to say that the EV batteries don't warm themselves up. So my Bolt EV, if you monitor the battery temperature sitting outside unplugged, it will let the battery go down to 20, 30 degrees internal battery temperature. It doesn't even care. The moment you turn the car on, it will start warming up the battery because it has to hit a minimum operational temperature before you can actually drive the car, and it's around 40 degrees. If you keep it plugged in, it will maintain that temperature. But if you leave it unplugged, it's happy to let it go below. The big problem is the charging speeds require much higher temperatures in order to actually hit your peak charging speed. So a battery might be operational at 40 degrees, which the car will maintain that temperature, but it's not going to fast charge at a peak rate until you hit probably 75, 80 degrees. And I think, Darren, even in the Teslas, right, it's even much higher than that for them to
closer
hit
to
their
130
speeds.
degrees. Yeah, like
Yeah,
50 to 55 C. Yeah.
What do they call it? Like afterburner or something?
Yeah, afterburners
To heat the
when you have both the motors heating up the battery. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to get the batteries to really high temperatures to get them to fast charge. To normal charge, to drive, the battery doesn't actually have to be that warm.
That is a compounding problem with the rideshare vehicles, because most of them being Teslas and rear-wheel drive LFP packs at this point, they are not good at heating themselves. And I think this is maybe a compound of the problem is you have a cold LFP pack, it just won't charge. And if it doesn't have enough ability to heat itself, because it only has one motor, that could compound the time it takes to warm up the battery, everything else, which is a problem that also people don't talk about too much, but it's there. Whereas like in my case, my car has two motors and it's, not LFP. So it can have twice the power to heat up the battery, and it's less sensitive to the cold. So there could be issues there for sure, depending upon the circumstance. So.
Do you guys have the thing on your car where it tells you when you're driving that you need to like warm up the battery to get to the next station or something like that? Someone that was driving a Kia told me that they had a feature like that was telling them when they were on the road that it was time to like turn that function on. Have you heard about that?
For Tesla, I'm sure Walter will come in here too. It'll be automatic as long as your next destination is a supercharger. If you navigate, like for me, from Chicago to Nashville, it'll drop superchargers in and say, hey, here, it'll precondition automatically for each one. If you target a supercharger, it'll start preconditioning whatever it needs to do automatically. Same, your experience, Walter's been the same, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I'm a max miler. What I normally do is I destination a street address off the superchargers so it doesn't warm up the pack and burn energy that way, so I can get a little bit more distance out of it. That's normally what I do. And I don't mind sitting a little extra at the supercharger at a lower charge rate. It doesn't bother me.
Maybe not 0 degrees, but
not a 0. Yeah, if we're talking about the survival situation in Chicago, that's a different story. But
the reason he doesn't mind is because he does fantastic site reviews, which is what we're going to go into. Before the cold interrupted us, and we spent 50 minutes talking about freezing places. Also, just one quick final word of PSA: this does not help you warm up the pack. It's not wireless charging. Don't try that at home. The audio listeners, you'll have to go to YouTube. That's not going to translate. But let's move on. Walter is provided the segue there. You have adopted Eric's tried and trusted before the pandemic, I think it was, all the way back then, News Coulomb site review model. Is that what we're going to call it?
Yeah.
Okay,
model, yes.
Yeah, so let me bring up, I had it somewhere here. This is one of your site reviews. So you've done a couple of these now, Walter, and you're scoring on Eric's 50-point site review model across 5 categories. I'll leave this up for a second, and maybe you could just kind of talk us through the methodology and where you've been to do this so far.
Well, I'll be happy to, and I do have to give a tremendous amount of credit to Eric, because the truth is that this doesn't just fall in out of a clear blue sky. This takes much thought and deliberation in order to compile what would make a scoring method for a charging site. And he did it over, I'm going through Eric's catalog. I enjoy listening to it while I'm going about my routine. And he's done site reviews for years, and this, as I understand, was developed through his experience. And at one point, he offered for me to follow the same method that he uses, and it just felt almost plagiaristic to me. I'm like, this is your body of work, man. I can't touch that thing. But after soul searching, I decided, it's the right thing to do because it's a great thing, and he offered and graciously accepted, and so that's what I did. And it is a terrific way of scoring sites with a lot of information that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise, specifically around the site speed, the aggregate throughput of the dispensers, and also the kVA rating of the transformer, among many other things.
So, and there's a couple of those. I think I linked one down in the chat somewhere, but once you get to Walter's channel, you'll see those, some of the recent ones. Eric, it's your methodology. You've done these site reviews. I can't remember how many there were, but it was definitely creeping up on.
It might have started as early as like 2018, maybe 2019. Before 2019, but it definitely evolved, and it was just, my sort of brainstorming all of the things, feedback that I was getting from different EV owners, from things people were asking for, or things people were implying or didn't know that they were asking for but were asking for. The very first DC fast charging I did was in a dark alley behind a Vaughn's in San Luis Obispo. So the people who know that EVgo charger probably know it very well. And it's like, I have, female friends and family that I wouldn't want them there alone charging at night. There's no security, there's no lighting. For me, I didn't care, but it didn't necessarily feel like safe, right? And so those are those little things that you start churning in your mind, and you get to the point of, I've owned trucks all my life. I've used work trucks and things like that. The fact that I knew I couldn't take a truck with a trailer to most of these charging sites and be able to hook up without detaching the trailer, that kind of put me on the road of, eventually EVs are going to be towing. We know this is going to happen. Why don't we have pull-through charging stalls? Why don't we have canopies protecting the chargers and the drivers from the elements and and squeegees, trash cans, the things that you would expect if you're driving any gas car? Why aren't those present at these charging sites? So that's really, I don't even want to take credit for the model because it's evolved so much over the years, and it's based on feedback and input and just iterations and iterations over time. So I feel like it belongs to the community anyway. It's not my model, if that makes sense.
It sounded like Mike Mahan was going to adopt that if it's your blessing. I think that's, as far as we can tell, that's kind of if we can get more and more site reviews that follow a kind of standard way of thinking and, maybe improve as we go along through suggestions from people, I only see that as being a positive. But Candice, before we got onto the topic of winter and everything kind of obsessed over that, this was what we discussed. And, when our first conversation together, it was trying to kind of navigate this, what are these, as you change from the kind of Maryland experience of charging and then traveling to where you are right now, a very different environment, starting to think of it from a safety, accessibility point of view. Can you speak to that a little bit and, what you're thinking as you pull up on the kind of charging stations that we see today?
Yeah, for me, I really just started to think about safety, driver education, and infrastructure a lot more since moving to Indiana. And I think that it's something that I think people that live on the coast don't really have to think about. But if you are in what I call a flyover state, you probably are going to need to consider these things because where I live is very rural, and I always have charging anxiety, range anxiety. I always have it. And I think it's one of those things that we have to be more cognizant. And I feel like it's something that people need to be advocating for, like charger safety and EV owner education. And I am really trying to do my part to, start like a little car club for critical EV infrastructure and safety and driver education, because I feel like it's that necessary. Because I'll tell you, the worst thing that can happen to you in Indiana is being caught out in a cornfield in the middle of winter or in the height of summer. And I've been there. And like the crazy thing about the i3, or at least the 2016 i3 that I have, is when you start to run out of charge, you're going to feel every bit of energy that you have left because you can only go 56 miles an hour. And that is terrifying to me. And it's actually happened. So, you know, I want to improve that. And I want people to really feel more confident about their ownership experience and traveling. I think it's really important.
We're going to you don't have the details yet, but as soon as we get that in place and the groups that you'll be creating, we'll make sure that we either follow up with you on one of these or do a separate video to make sure we get that kind of joining and get the community kind of motoring around that, because I think it'll be a valuable asset. Darren, from the Tesla side, we know the reliability is huge, and they kind of, aside from what we've talked about for the majority of this show, they have that covered in regular cases. But there are some gaps as far as, you know, to Eric's point, pull through is not that common at Tesla Superchargers, with the exception of one or two stalls here or there. Canopies are pretty rare, as they are with most sites. What deficiencies do you see? And, you know, is there anything that we can learn from what Tesla does right that we need to really bake into site design from a kind of physical point of view?
Well, if every Tesla stop across the country was at a Buc-ee's with a cover, it'd be perfect, in my opinion. But it's not, unfortunately. Yeah, there we go.
Walter agrees as
well. Basically,
sandwich.
Yeah, I've been to two Buc-ee's many times. Like, I wish Buc-ee's were more commonplace at this point. But for anyone that has an EV, I feel like a Buc-ee's is the ideal, at least from a safety vantage point. Everything else is about as good as it gets. There's never
the director of marketing is watching from Buc-ee's. Then
I hope so.
This channel is seeking a sponsor, and we're happy to take on any money you want to put.
Yeah, but don't put any of them. Don't put them in Illinois, because they'll be full of rideshare. I don't know. They'll be sleeping in their cars. No, I think the covers are the biggest issue. I've noticed that there still just aren't covers. Sometimes there's a Tesla Supercharger in a weird location. Usually it's V2s, like behind a Baskin Robbins is a pretty weird place for a V2 in the middle of, and there's nothing else around. But generally speaking, they're in pretty good places. But they never have covers. There's no covers. Often there's not a trash can, things like that are kind of trivial but important, honestly. I don't care as much about, I guess personally, about like cleaning the windshield and stuff for whatever reason, but a trash can would be nice, and a good bathroom, but a cover. I feel like everyone just wants to put covers over these chargers. And I know that they're doing that, you know, right now with the expansion into the Flying J, right, everywhere, and Pilot, stuff like that, etc. Like they're getting there, but for CCS, but really, I think it's the only difference I would complain about. But more Buc-ee's would be great. I'll take that. So,
Walter, testify.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's only 17 Buc-ee's outside of the state of Texas, and I understand most of the ones in the state of Texas are not the big, ginormous ones. They're just kind of small, little rinky-dink ones. There's a couple of the big ones. So Buc-ee's is definitely not the savior. It's expedient for the Mercedes-Benz charging hub initial phase, but they just don't have the proliferation necessary in order to provide that level playing field that, as was mentioned, Pilot Flying J does have. Their ubiquity is ginormous. You don't see them until you see them, and once you see them, you see how much they are everywhere. And it's not uncommon for me to get off an exit to go do a site visit, and there's a Pilot Flying J here, and then there's a Pilot here, and there's a Flying J here, and it's the same exit, it's the same company, and they own both sides of the interstate. And canopies are a thing for them. God bless them. I mean, it's a sight for sore eyes, and welcome facility, open 24/7, 365, always well lit, and as Brian pointed out, they seem to have squeegees size for Paul Bunyan.
Is that the best? Is that now the gold standard, do we think? As far as, because it certainly has parity with gas experience at that point, no?
Well, yeah, but I guess the count is really the question of, you know, the superchargers have higher concentration of stalls. And Circle K has a pretty good plan where they're piping in additional future stalls when they do their builds, ready for upcoming congestion. Pilot doesn't seem to have got that concept down. So I would say there's chinks in their armor. And we'll have to see what the 7-company consortium dreams up, because that might be the new gold standard.
I mean, the other thing here as well is, we a lot of people tout the benefit of driving electric, that you can wave at gas stations as you go by, and here we are, our biggest savior, standard bearer for the future of EV charging is a truck stop. And I just purely practically, when I did the review of the one in London, Ohio, there were trucks constantly going by. It's how I had to get back in the car to record the video because it's that noisy. So for all of the, this is a great location. It certainly is, but I'm still, trying to temper my expectations a little bit, because I've always been positive on a lot of the sites that go in. I'm trying to step back and look from that kind of, Eric Way perspective of, here's the good, here's the not so good. What do we expect? What is the next level of standards for DC?
Yeah, on the news, Coulomb site review model, where they don't score well is the stall count.
Mm-hmm. And tying that back, it's basically those sites are about the same size as that supercharger that went down in Chicago, Darren, in terms of throughput and power, right? It's the two 350-ish kilowatt cabinets. And so that's been the big concern with the pilot sites is, what if one of those dispensers goes down? Now you're really limiting access. And then, it's just, that's like you said, the big hole in their plan is just their site concentration.
And Candice, I'm interested in your perspective on first of all, whether you've seen many of these or not, but also because I think this will be, on a practical level, your next savior potentially in that corridor, and everybody who's traveling that Chicago to Indianapolis. There will be probably on both sides, I think it was either a pilot or a Flying J going in with this kind of facility that we're talking about. But from your perspective, is a truck stop a place that, it's a 24/7 facility, it's got amenities, so all that is on the good side, but it's still, a truck stop's a truck stop. They have their kind of connotations. Is that somewhere you would want to be charging?
No, I don't want to be like a lot lizard or something. No, I think that truck stops are places that are convenient, and they certainly serve a purpose. But I think in terms of safety as a woman, I am thinking about the 65 corridor all the time. And that corridor, I feel there is a lot of traffic, there is a lot of trucking, but I feel like it's really strangely isolated because of the way that the chargers are set up. And I hope that, as the NEVI project kind of expands in Indiana, I'm hoping that it's going to be like every 50 miles up the 65 corridor. That's what I'm hoping. But no, truck stops are not an ideal place. The first thing that popped in my head is like Love's in Virginia when you're like driving down the coast from Maryland. So no, I'm not crazy about that.
A perspective on that, should we consider the fact that a charger that's meant for travel versus common usage around town, perhaps the standards would be different for one that's meant purely for traveling across the country versus one you want to feel safe and at home and part of your city? Perhaps they would be viewed differently. I don't know, or handled differently.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying they should be. And I think that that's the problem in the location that I'm at, because it's right off of 65. And on one side of the interstate are the Tesla superchargers. And then the other side of the interstate are the 4, Electrify America chargers. I think that the main concern in like locations where I am is that people
someone's trying to silence the good people at Flying J who've cut you off there. Sorry. We lost the last 20 or 30 seconds.
Oh, I was just saying that you're absolutely right, Darren. I think that a lot of people that are local in the community are competing with those travelers from other states on 65 for sure, and that's a huge problem. I sent Steve the picture of Thanksgiving weekend at that station. There were 9 cars backed up. And I'm sure that there were some locals that were also waiting to charge, along with people that were just trying to get home from Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I think, and we've only touched on it a little bit, but this, that does get down to the crux of the problem. Your only option is the one station, and this is true in a few different areas. For me, Bedford, Pennsylvania springs to mind because Electrify America is the only option down there, and that is the kind of grinding point for any holiday weekend. That's where it gets stuck, and I'm sure we all have examples along that. But Eric, you're probably maybe the exception there, although you do have higher volume of people trying to use them. But you've got to a point from your videos where we can see that you have your choice, right? You can pick if you want to go for longer dwell time, sit down restaurant, retail options, that kind of thing. You have that side, or if you were in a vehicle that was going to crank out, like you did your EV6 trip, you wanted to just get it done in 15 20 minutes, you have stops for that. What are you thinking in terms of the future for the rest of the country for these standards that we try to set?
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting in the sense that to me, Candace and Darren sort of represent the sort of feast and famine models of but Darren has the high population, but then the massive number of chargers in the immediate area. Candace has the lower population, but the limited number of chargers in the area, and that changes the dynamic a lot. And I've kind of experienced both living, right? When I was in Ventura in Southern California, it was that urban model with a lot of chargers, but nothing near what was needed for the size of the population, versus up here in Northern California, we have a very similar town, multiple multi-unit dwellings with no charging and 2 public chargers in the town of 5,000-6,000 people. But it's right off of I-5 in California, which means they're busy all the time. So if you were a local EV owner without charging at home, you would be up a canal. We don't really have creeks up here, but yeah. So the thing is, I think we need to have 2 models, and I think I've always said grocery stores and local shopping areas are the places where you can give the most support to urban dwellers, or even just small city dwellers who don't have charging at home, because they're going to be interfacing with those businesses at a regular basis. I don't think those chargers should be fast either. I think that something like the Chem Power, where you're splitting 50 kilowatt stalls, but you can fit 6, 8, 10 cars in at a time, that makes sense for a smaller community, for a grocery store or retail shopping. And then have these travel plazas specifically for the traveling, where you're getting dedicated 300, 350 kilowatts of power at a post, and you have all of the travel amenities. But, I think Walter and I even talked about that. I think that is a hole in pilot, is I think that they should probably have a couple of split power charging banks off to the side for slower charging EVs, or people who are going to stop at the Denny's, right? If you're going to be there for 45 minutes to an hour with your family, you don't need a 350 kilowatt charger.
It's a good point. One of the site reviews you did, Walter, had an additional kind of side Delta 100 kilowatt station, as well as the ones that we typically see in your reviews under the canopies with the 350 kilowatt. Can you talk to that a little bit, and kind of what you would like to see if there are going to be additions beyond the kind of 4 350 kilowatt handles? What would you like to see from a site perspective?
It was definitely curious. I don't know what their thinking was there. It was off away from the canopy, and it was a different model. It was what they call their city charger, I believe is what they call those. And from what I understood, Pilot Flying J purchased the hardware in advance, and this is one unit at one location that doesn't fit the model. And I'm not quite sure what their thought was. I mean, we don't have knowledge into their operations or site designs. I could only assume because it was on Interstate 95, they were just looking for some additional capacity, and that fit the bill without spending more money on an additional 350 is all I could think. But that's pure speculation on my part. What I would like to see is similar to Circle K, where at least they put in the piping for the inevitable additional capacity that would be necessary. And I don't see any of that going in currently at Pilot Flying J. And unless their intention is to quietly dissuade non-GM customers from their location by keeping their prices high and only catering to GM customers primarily, and thereby the 4 stalls would be sufficient or the 6 stalls being sufficient, they're going to see a lot of customers. And even with the high price, as Eric mentioned, if you're driving a Rivian and towing, or driving a Cybertruck or a Silverado EV and you're towing, these are places along the interstate that you'll want to stop to pull through and get your charge. And it doesn't matter if it's an additional 10 or 15 cents per kilowatt hour. It's just the convenience of not having to unhook. So it's curious. I'm not quite sure what's going on behind the curtain at Pilot Flying J with their site design. It is very unique.
One point I should touch on briefly is we're kind of winding down here, but accessibility, and these are obviously the big wide open sites have a little more accessible room so that you can get in and out. I would, I'd encourage everybody to kind of look at the next time you go to some of these sites, look at them and put yourself in that kind of position of, folks who need that accessible parking. Because I will put my hands up. Someone on one of the videos from the London, Ohio site, asked, I hate to be that guy, they apologize first of all, which they should never do. But, is there a reason you're in the accessible spot? Which I was, I look back at the video, I'm like, yeah, I'm in that. And although I was with the car, I was filming, my reasoning was good photo op, right? The sunset was in the other end, and it was a good thing for the thumbnail. But it's one of those things that afterwards I thought I pay very little attention to that, to be fair, when I go to these stations, and it's something I need to kind of get in the headspace of, where is that sign? It was signposted as an accessible stall. It was something I could have moved, but it's just kind of from the off. Maybe we don't create that kind of that potential challenge, the potential conflict of someone having to say, could you move out of that space? Candice, that's something you and I talked about as well a little bit. Maybe you could talk to that for just a sec here.
Yeah, I mean, accessibility is really important. But I also feel like, again, just like Darren said, it's a matter of like local drivers competing with, travelers. I think that so far, I haven't really come up with an issue, or I haven't really seen an issue where accessibility in terms of like someone that's disabled or something needs to use a charger quickly. But I have just seen people that are like, hey, I just was around the corner trying to charge on a level 2 charger and I need to go to a wedding. Can you get off of the charger and let me charge? Things like that are really like crazy scenarios that I think people shouldn't have to compete and get into these like weird charger altercations for. And I've seen a lot of that, like local people being like, hey, I have to go pick up my kid. Can I charge real quick? Can you get off the charger? And I think that situations like that would probably be limited if they had a better kind of charging infrastructure for people that are local in the community versus people that are traveling through on the interstate.
It's interesting. I actually just had someone on my channel reach out to me because they received a ticket for charging in an ADA compliant stall without ADA plates. And so we've had discussions in California, but even the United States going way back, that EV charging stalls are primarily EV charging. And so that trumps all other uses. And so it sounds like some jurisdictions are still starting to enforce that sort of ADA compliance in terms of the parking. But think about it, if you're a Nissan Leaf driver and you're trying to use an Electrify America station, the only charger that's ADA compliant is the CHAdeMO charger. So it creates this really weird tension between what we're supposed to be doing and what we're not supposed to be doing. And the counterpoint that I can think of too is, when was the last time you saw an ADA compliant gas pump? So there is no such thing, right? Because the primary purpose of the parking space next to a gas pump is fueling. So if you're not fueling your vehicle, you shouldn't be parked there regardless of your ADA status. So the fact that we now have these parking spaces, quote unquote, that have to be made ADA compliant, yet are also EV charging stalls, creates this weird contradiction that nobody, frankly, right now seems to know how to enforce. So I think it's a real problem moving forward, because we definitely want van accessible chargers and things of that nature. But there needs to be, at that point, based on the laws and the interpretations that I've seen so far, that station needs to be listed as not a publicly open charging stall. So as far as anybody who's not ADA or van accessible compliant is concerned, it's no longer a charging station. The other stalls are, but that one is not. So we're getting to an interesting point, I think. So
we should apply bathroom rules, I feel like, to the charging locations. I mean, we don't see people handing out tickets for using the ADA stall. That's the only stall available usually. So I don't know. I think maybe that's the most simple way of doing it.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe I don't want to trivialize it, but I mean, it's also different time scale, right? A little bit. Hopefully you're out of the bathroom in a reasonable amount of time to where it's not a big problem, but in the charger, it could be longer. It just depends if people are given the right level of respect to the situation, I guess.
But that was the other facet, Darren, you bring up a good point, is it also within that documentation specifies time signs. So if it's a van accessible space, it might have a 10 or 15 minute limit. So sure, maybe you can use it, but you can use it for 10 or 15 minutes and then you have to exit. So, that's the alternative, I guess, maybe fair, like you said, a fair or equitable practice for it. So.
Okay, let me jump back through the comments. We'll start to wrap up here. T. Palmer says, glad to see and hear a woman's perspective on charging safety, especially at truck stops. Yeah, I'm sure we all are. It's that opinion kind of across the board that we want to, we don't want to avoid groupthink. The way we get to these better standards and higher quality stations is by having everybody pitch in and getting some different perspectives. Actually, it was Tyler at the Average EV. Where did he go? He also mentioned that he started doing site reviews, which you can see over on his channel, the Average EV, by again, just kind of looking through, and it was his wife's traveling that he kind of thought about. So again, thinking about different levels of travel, who's traveling, are they as a family? That's another category of, people that maybe, you have different requirements, but also says slow DC is a great option, especially if it's one cabinet with site-based power distribution, to Eric's point. With Kempower, maybe 350 kilowatt could be split 7 ways, for example, or 14 ways. 25 kilowatt is great for an hour dwell time. Yeah, so we need a little bit of diversity, a little bit of options, and put that power in the right stall rather than trying to get people to go to the right power level. What else do we have?
I was really thinking, though, charging speed for your car is what really matters, not necessarily the power. Because, a lot of people don't even know their car's charging speed. Just, I'm just saying.
Well, and then also, okay, so Candace, you and I are driving fairly efficient cars. I mean, Darren too. So if we were plugging in an i3 or a Model 3 or a Bolt EV on a 20 kilowatt DC fast charger, we're going to see a lot more benefit out of that than someone who's driving a F-150 Lightning, right? They're going to be on a 20 kilowatt charger for days. So
They
whereas,
only need AC charging, actually. They can do 20 kilowatts almost.
yeah, so some of it comes down to efficiency, but like you said, some of it comes down to your car itself. What can it do?
Yeah.
I think I pretty much exhausted the comments. If I've missed you, I do apologize. We're getting more and more folks, and I appreciate you all having a back and forth in the comments and the live chat as well. That's always appreciated. We were going to touch on the tax credits at point of sale. Does still everyone got a couple of minutes to do that, or do we need to jump off? Okay, I'm going to pass that over to you, Walter, and we can all have a quick speak to it. But after that, we will wrap up here. Thank you for your extended attention.
Yeah, so welcome to 2024, where you go in and get an EV, and the salesperson has an additional card to play of dropping the price $7,500, assuming all the stars line up immediately as you walk out of the door. So that is now a part of the mix, and we could argue about government subsidies left and right, but that's the reality. You walk into a car dealership, and the electric car has got the option of immediately taking $7,500 off, assuming that it qualifies, and out you go. You don't have to wait for doing your taxes the next year. So I don't think that could be underestimated how much of an impact that's going to make as we start to ramp back up into the sales season in the spring after the New Year's hangover.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say too, Walter, I think people underestimate just how much the increasing interest rate at the end of 2023 really affected car sales, just as a whole, but EV sales in particular. I'd mentioned before, I went to a Ford dealership, and they said even if you had an 800 FICO, it was something like 7 or 8 or 9% for a 72-month loan, which is just a ridiculous interest rate. But you take $7,500 right off the top at point of sale. Now all of a sudden it becomes a more affordable option again.
Math changes. You don't have to wait a year for it either. Yeah. And, Tesla's got a pretty slick thing. They're all over that. Apparently, you go buy a Tesla now, and it comes right off the price, right through the website purchase. And so I think this is definitely going to accelerate numbers. People are talking about 2 mil by the end of this year. I think it's going to be a little bit higher.
Let me widen it out a little bit, because we haven't we've done EV sales to death and the flagging demand versus record sales thing, but Darren and Candice haven't had their say on previous shows. So Darren, what are you thinking? You can take it wherever you want, but EV sales and how incentives kind of play into it at point of sale, what do you think?
So I'm in a bit of a weird situation. So I did get my EV tax credit for my Bolt. State of Illinois offered a $4,000 rebate when I purchased my Model 3 for a used vehicle. So I received that. The point of sale concerns me because it's going to affect the taxable dollar amount for the state. So the state almost certainly is now incentivized to come in here and do something about that. And now they're seeing this extra money you're going to get at point of sale that they're going to want. And so knowing Illinois had the benefit at one point where you could pay $35 for 2 years for registration for an EV. I got that for 2 years. And then they changed it to $251 a year, $100 more than a gas car. So while they gave $4,000, I'm very cynical with this. I think states are going to find a way and reason to, like, if you buy an EV, we're going to charge you an additional EV tax, even if we give you a credit in state to make up for our lost money that you're not paying us. So I'm cynical. I think that we should have let the tax credits be. I think we'd be in a better position today. I think cars would be way cheaper today. I think they're inflated a lot right now because of this. And I think there's a lot more margin in EVs, especially for Tesla, maybe others as well. Certainly wasn't the Bolt, than they are leading on at the moment. And I don't think it's helping anyone, and they're going to find ways just to take the money back. That's just my opinion. That's my piece. Okay.
We love a contrarian opinion.
Yeah.
Candice, how are you seeing incentives in general, or what do you feel about the EV sales outlook in 2024? Those two questions, take them wherever you like.
Yeah. Well, I think that I just got my like tax incentive from CarMax like today. So I haven't even opened it up to like look to see what it was. But I
I lost you. Keeps cutting you off in your prime.
Yeah.
am I back? Okay.
Yeah.
I believe that I think didn't they change some of the parameters? So it depends on the type of car that you have, whether or not you're going to get the full incentive. I don't know. I thought I
The
read that the other
materials
day.
and the battery where it's manufactured, the materials have changed
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah,
So-
it's worth noting it's not set in stone at the moment because people are still filing paperwork and some vehicles are still, or some models are still to be kind of certified. So if you're looking at a model that's not, don't give up on it yet because it may well, just filter through in the next week or two.
Is
But,
leasing still universal though? Correct?
Yeah.
Leasing.
Yeah,
is
it's
still
a commercial
universal.
vehicle if it's leased, so that's why you'll see a lot of Hyundai, Kia to a lesser extent. Volvo, I think, is going to lean into leases a lot this year, especially with the X30 coming up. But there's a bunch of ways around the model limitation. But if you're outright purchasing, there's certainly a limited number at the moment. I think it was 13 at the last count. That'll probably balloon to maybe 17, 18 by the time we get to February. But it's you may not have the model that you want, on that 7,500 tax credit as an outright purchase.
Mhm.
Anybody else have anything on that? Because we're hit that 1 hour 30, and I think that's a good stopping point. Unless anyone.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention something that I think Darren and I have talked about on the side is that $7,500 credit. It's awfully convenient how trucks like the Tesla Cybertruck and the Chevy Silverado 4WT just happen to come in $1,000 under the cap for a $7,500 credit.
The Model X free color pick.
Yeah, so it's just these convenient pricing that their margins are higher, but it's almost as though they're pricing up to that. And you can see it in things like the Hyundai Ioniq 6, where it's like, hey, we don't qualify, fire sale, we're giving you a huge discount. Or GM, where they say, well, the Blazer and the Lyriq don't qualify, so we'll give you a $7,500 credit. So it's almost like that margin is baked in there, and the prices might be artificially inflated as a result of this tax credit. So, there's some counterpoints to it. So there's good and bad, but given what the prices are, it's better. I think the net benefit of having that $7,500 credit is there, and definitely having it as a point of sale is going to help things. So
let's end on a positive note. Mr. Eric Way is News Coulomb on YouTube. Go check out his original site reviews so you can see the methodology, how it evolved, and then you can move on to the Network Architect channel. Mr. Walter Schulze has some of the newest, hottest stations in the United States on that review model. And if you are liking what you're seeing here and you want to listen to it on your commute, as I mentioned, it's under my name for some reason. I will try and change that to Coast-to-Coast EVs everywhere. But you can now listen to us on Spotify and in a few different places. I'll hand over to our guests to close us out. Is there anything you'd like to shout out? Anything we should be watching for from you, or just recommendations of things to watch in the EV space? Darren, let's go.
Yeah, you can find me on X Darren_orange. Also, that I'm just happy to be involved with the EV stuff and experience it, and gone through my whole trials and tribulations. It's been an adventure. I'm looking forward to seeing where things go in the next 5 to 10 years, I guess. So. Maybe I'll make some more videos soon. I keep saying that. I made one today, but I don't know that I'll do it very much. So
this counts as a video. You're on video, if not.
I'm on video. Okay,
We
and
definitely appreciate your channel kind of pumping out some cold weather stuff. Candice, where should we look for you, and what should we watch for in the near future?
Yeah, you can look for me on LinkedIn. I was hoping to have my little landing page up for my little car club today, but it didn't happen. But it's going to happen very soon. So if you're interested in just learning more about upcoming EV infrastructure, connecting with other EV car owners, and advocacy, safety, and just all of the things in between. Definitely follow me on LinkedIn, and watch out for Critical EV Car Club.
Critical EV Car Club. I love it. Very good stuff. And just closing out, Marlon May says, great discussion. Thank you very much. Amenable to networking on LinkedIn. Yes, I believe Candice is right on there already, and I will be shortly after this. So definitely hit us up on there. Let us know you saw the live stream, and we can kind of have a conversation around it. Thank you all for going over. I appreciate it. I know we just jumbled the agenda at the last minute there, but anything we didn't get to today, we'll make sure we put in the next one. So that's in 2 weeks' time. And if all goes to plan, we'll have Brandon Boggs from ChargeWay joining us. So we'll have a good lot of talk about EV route planning and what we can do to make our trips better. Thank you, everybody. Have a good couple of weeks here, and try and stay warm.
Thank you. Bye.
Right.